this is a Hashir in Sefer Mamorim Tov Reish Mem Zayin, which is part of the Sefer Kloli Tov Reish Mem Bo Ad Tov Reish Nun, and we are learning the Maimah from Pasha Zocher Tov Reish Mem Zayin Zocher Eish Asher Solach HaMolech. And we are holding on Omid Pei Daled of the Sefer, and tonight is Tuesday night, Oyer Lakof Tes Shvat Toshinai Beis. So we were holding Beneger to the union of Das, what the Rebbe called Das HaMishpashet. And it's interesting, we're dealing with the Klolos Sugya here, which is dealt with in the Shir Tanya we had today. So it's interesting how the Eivshter brings Alei Nyonim B'Yachad. I've seen it on many occasions. When you learn one Indian in Tom Chitmim, automatically you find the same Indian somewhere else, and you find it at a different angle and different even Habir and so on. It's really quite amazing. It's happened many times over the years. So this is mamish the same Indian, but here it's dealt with in much more detail, and it arouses certain questions and insights into the matter which are from a slightly different angle in Tanya. However, we saw that the Rebbe said that from Bina, or in Bina, I'm sorry, within the Koyach HaBina, what the Adam is married by his bonanas in Gedulas Ein Sof Baruch Hu, but that brings him to a gilui and an arousal of Midas Shebamoichin. Bechin of Avira, what he called it, Zayin Taktonim de Tavuna. Tavuna being Oishis Ben Ubas, and it's the we saw that Tavuna was the hispilus of the Moyach to and upon the Noisei and the content of these bonds that was Mizbein Bariches. And those are called Midas Siklium in other places, or is Pilus Siklis or Midas Shabamoichin. They have different names, but they all indicate the same basic concept. And after that is Miyad Nimshechai is Pilus Ba'alev. When he writes Miyad, that's ideally speaking. That's how it should be. Of course, there can be interferences, Mitzad the Nefesh Abamis, Mitzad other Inyonim, which can interfere with that. Al-Tzad ideal, then it should be Miyad Nimshach is Pilus Ba'alev, and we see that Vahu Inyan Meshichas Halev Shenimshach Acharei Ha'is Pilus Shebamoya. Now, we can suggest why the Rebbe said this is Miyad, because it's immediate, because this is not the ultimate Pilus of the Midas Shebalev. It's not the ultimate perfection of Gilui Ha'is Pilus Morgeshes in the Leiv Kipshute. Noah then, he said there's Nimshach a certain is Pilus in the Leiv, but it's in the form of a drawing of the Leiv. Meshika means like drawing after. The Leiv is Nimshach is drawn and prone towards, which is Nimshach Acharei Ha'is Pilus Shebamayach. In other words, there's a certain arousal on the part of the heart, and it leans upwards towards the message of the Midas Shebamoichin, and somehow or another senses and feels, and it can be immediate, because it's not yet the ultimate finality of Midas. It's like a sensitivity of the heart immediately following the Midas Shebamoichin in that general theme of the Midah which was being aimed at by these bonas, and the heart reacts by rousing up and expressing a certain readiness to be makabel, that inyan. And that's called Das HaMishpashet. It's a very amazing idea. And we find that somebody who has what's called Gadlus HaMoichin, the really greatness of and full adulthood of ability to be misboin in his moya, and he has what we call Gadlus HaMidas also. It's more in Kuntres HaTfilah and Kuntres HaVodah, there the midas rise up and follow the moichin entirely. There's like no break point between the Etz HaMashiach of the Lev to the is Pilus HaMidah Shabamoyach, and that's complete, and all the midah becomes like a midah joined up with the moichin altogether and becomes a very delicate and high form of his Pilus. But that's called Pnimis HaMidah and Pnimis HaMoichin. Over here we're not holding by that, but here we do say that at the beginning there's a certain movement of the heart upwards towards and that we could suggest that when he's been misboin and b'amitias, then he feels a certain reaction in the heart, which is leading towards genuine midas, but is not yet in the heart, and that's called Mashiachas Alev, and that's what we're going to call here Das HaMishpashit. So now he puts in just like a Maimar Muzga, almost like a bracketed remark. Ulefiyomim yeshin in Mashiachas Alev, Mashalev Magish for Nimshach Acha Izadova. A person can be Nimshach after coming on Lavtavkia Midash Belev, or he can sort of have a feeling. It's what we might almost call intuition and sensitivity to in a higher state in himself. What he feels attracted to a certain Indian, and he feels that in that direction he can gain a tremendous toilas, or he feels that that has a great message for him. It's kedai to do that, all sorts of expressions of that nature. So he said, Beloshan Ashkenaz, the heart seats there too. The heart pulls you and draws you towards that particular thing. We can suggest that's another inyan that doesn't have to do with moed, but that's going up in a higher realm beyond the actual inyan of the moichin, and that's like you might say the heart's field. There's an expression. His heart feels that way. His senses. It's a higher inyan altogether. V'chan over here, a kavona. Here the purpose, what we're trying to define and bring out here. That the heart goes, as it were, and is nimshach, is drawn and prone after the message of those avavira siklim, of those midas in the moichin. In other words, the heart senses, begins to feel a certain, what you might call, lead-in to its ultimate feeling. And that comes from the first beginning of the function of Koyach Hadas after Koyach Habina, and that's called Das HaMishpashit. Now, that's written in the Siddur. He brings in the footnote down here, the Rebbe. That's written more barichas in the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, in the Tfilas B'Kol HaShana, and also in the work of the Mittel Rebbe, Pirush HaMilas. The Pirush HaMilas is a sefer of different passages from the davening, from the Mittel Rebbe. Not from the whole davening, but from passages here and there. So over there, they explain a little bit in more length this whole concept. Over here, that's the union. That there's a movement on the part of the moya to attract the midas, because they've already got a certain midas siklim. Now, these midas siklim are just, in a general way, that Elikus is tov and Elikus is great in its own essence, and it's worthwhile having fear and love of that. But it's not fear and love in the real sense. The heart gets drawn after that message and senses that, and that's like you might call a lead-in or a movay to the ultimate midas believe, and that's called das, moving out and sort of being mispashate, spreading itself out in its first activity towards the heart. Says the Rebbe, however, ha'ikahu ba'avida she'evoled b'leiv b'chinas eispilus amidas b'morgash. So he said that's already a very delicate inyan, and it's a beginning, as you might say, and there's a certain sensitivity in the heart. But he said the ikka, and that's why I put in the word ach. What ach means like a sort of a modification of what we said, that ultimately speaking, that's not that. And therefore, the ultimate purpose and the ultimate principle is that you should have a birth in the heart, pilus amidas b'murgash, that you should feel in the lave, murgash meaning felt and aware, midas in the actual heart, kipshute. Avira be pilus b'murgash. There should be an arousal and a reaction in the soul in a felt way. Murgash. Now, murgash is the touch of feeling yourself, really. Murgash means that you feel deeply your own self, but you feel your elikus through yourself, and you love elikus to a certain extent because of yourself. Because you feel involved, and you feel drawn in, and you feel excited and stirred with Avos Hashem. And that's what the ultimate tachlis the Aveda is. Validezeh bo achacha akiyum hamitzvahs b'sur mirah v'aseitev b'poel mamish. By turning away from evil and doing good, b'poel mamish. Now, with that sentence, the Rebbe has put in an important meaning which we're now going to develop on at some length. Why do we say that the ultimate purpose of the Aveda and the ultimate shleimus is to reach this pilus murgeshes in the lave, which is already like a form almost of self-interest, like we said today, it's an involvement of the self and a commitment of the self. So if we talk about madregas per se in this, that's a low madrega. And later on he's going to point out there can even be a certain unique lechitanim, a certain nurturement, even to the non-desirable koiches from there, because you can sort of drift out into other inyonim with that. She's pilus. She's pilus means, having been affected in a emotional way, it doesn't always lead, in the most safe direction. Yet nonetheless, that's the ultimate tachlis. Says the Rebbe, why? Because through that, you come to carry out the mitzvahs the way they're really meant to be. Kiyum ha-mitzvahs b'sur mirah v'yasei tov b'poel mamish. But that he's saying, why would I demand, if I can have a person who has this pilus, a mitzvah, that's a very high and delicate madrega. This Mashiach Halev we just spoke about is also a delicate thing. Why do we have to have Dafki Yerida into the heart that it should be felt, and which, to a certain extent, even though it's a Yerida, but he said that is the ultimate purpose of everything. Now, in some places, it's written that the reason for that is because basically your Nefesh Abamis lives in that area. Your Nefesh Abamis is in part of the heart. That's where Kamavu in Tanya, in Perek Tesem, and Perek Yud, and Alumis, and Perek Yud Beis. That's where he lives, the Nefesh Abamis. So in order to really burn away the Nefesh Abamis and weaken his power, and by really great Bali Aveda to even be Mavada the Nefesh Abamis, you've got to deal with him on his level. Therefore, Murgash and his pilus, Koch, as they call it in Yiddish, being stirred up inside the Nefesh, in the heart, well, that goes over into the next door neighbor, into the left ventricle of the heart, and can affect the Nefesh Abamis and take away burn out his enthusiasm and things of that nature. Here the Rebbe is answering a slightly different teretz. It's based on the same basic principle. Over here the Rebbe is saying, why do you need that as pilus b'murgash? Because Tafki through that you'll come to do the mitzvahs of Poel Mamish with a different enthusiasm. And the ultimate aim of everything in Torah is to bring, that the Torah should bring us to Kiyum HaMitzvahs in the best possible way. So if we said Tafki through this low level, as it were, even though it's an achievement, his pilus, murgeshes in the heart, Tafki through that you'll come to keep the mitzvahs properly. And that's what we're going to see in Perek Dalet, immediately at the beginning of Perek Dalet in Tanya. That's what the Alter Rebbe says, that a makayim be'emes, that he who keeps the mitzvahs in a genuine way is misha oyev Shem Hashem v'chofetz l'dovka bo. Somebody who has ava, then he keeps the mitzvahs asay. he does everything he can to, and he does it in a full way and enthusiastic way to keep the mitzvahs, and he who has yiras Hashem and fear of the Eibusha, then he keeps away from the mitzvahs Hashem. So that's basically what he's saying here, that if you don't have Ahava v'yira, you don't really feel enthused to keep the mitzvahs with a shleimus. Now you can keep the mitzvahs, but you do it through Kabbalah soil, through other inyanim, and that could, at some point or another, dry up a bit. It could cool off. It could become a little bit without chayis, particularly what we call chayis pnimius, a brand of the pnimius hanefesh, keeping the mitzvahs. Mashenkein, if you got Ahava v'yira, then there's this tremendous, as it were, demand of the nefesh and the odom to keep the mitzvahs with all the enthusiasm and fire that we would expect. So that's what he answers now. First of all begins with a Moshe Gashmi for that. Moshe Begashmi hine aleiv hu amamutza bein hamoyach l'sharei ha'evorim. In other words, the middle point, the middle go-between. Mamutza means a go-between, or like a joining madrega. Bein hamoyach l'sharei ha'evorim is the heart. In other words, that if you go from moyach and you want to get into activity and you want to stir up the other evorim, it's only first of all to go through the heart. The ikar hashua sachayis uba moyach, that the main dwelling of all the life of force, chayis meaning here the life in general, uba moyach shebareich. Lies mavu in Tanya Perik Nun Aleph, Perik Nun and Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, that the shortage of all chayis is dafki in the moyach. Ukadei shiyum shach in a moyach achayis lahachiyeh, so evorim gashmiyim hu alidei aleiv. Shami hamoyach nimshach haruach chayim b'chol hayomini shebeleiv. Now what happens is, first of all, the Rebbe, that everything is there in the brain. Over in the brain, it's in a very high and detached, just like the brain below is a thinking, and therefore it's a detached medium. It's not something which is necessarily connected with all the other evorim. So how are you going to get to all the other evorim? First of all, you send down this message from the brain. Now, this we're talking now simply in Gashmis, not necessarily a high spiritual message, but send down a message into the Chol HaYomini, which is Ruchnias. In other words, first of all, we get a certain Ruchniastic message into the heart, and then that moves over into the Chol HaSmoli, but that's where the dam is. That's where the material or the fuel that needs to be sent to all the other Evorim, that's where it's situated in the left ventricle of the heart. So there's a certain Ruach Chaim, the Rebbe calls it Ruach Chaim. The brain gives a form of life which is called Ruach. Ruach is a spirit. So the brain is not just pure Gashmistic Chayas, it's like a form of message together with Chayas. And then ultimately there's a certain Indian, why do I have to do what am I doing around here, goes with it. But basically it's the Chayas, and that's what's Mavu in Tanya. It is basically the Chayas of the Nefesh. Just that the way the brain has it, it's a very idle and maybe even message type of Chayas. And then it goes down, that's called Ruach Chaim. It's life, but it's got a certain spirit to it. And that spirit is both liveliness and, to a certain extent, like a message and an implication. And therefore it's called Ruach Chaim, and that goes down into the what can take that in the heart, the Chol HaYomini, because he points out in Tanya, the right ventricle, the right section of the heart is Panui Midam. It doesn't really have the inner blood, and it's able to take spiritual messages. And that's a form of like emotional type readiness and a hysteria inside that. And then it passes it over into the left ventricle where the dam is. Once you get to the dam, well, then it spreads out to all the other evorim. And so we see that the heart is like a middle point. It's got an part to it which is closer to the moichin, a lower part of which is shy to all the rest of the body, and therefore it joins the lave and it joins the ivorim and the moyach together, and therefore it's called a mamutza. Because it's well known that a mamutza has got both aspects. It's got a higher aspect lagabi the higher, the mashpia, and a lower level lagabi the kabel. That's what a mamutza is. So therefore he says, "Yeah, leivu mamutza bein moyach l'shane ivorim." The ikar shows achayes uberoi kadei shiyumshach min hamoyach achayes lahachyes. You have to give life force to all the ivorim gashmim. What is their leiv? Kami hamoyach nimshach haruach hayim becholol hayomini shebeleiv. Umispashit be'adam shebecholol hasmoli. And it spreads out and goes over from the cholol hayomini into the cholol hasmoli. Well, that's where the blood is. Ruinian is chabros ruach chayim with the dam, and that's called ruinian is chabros ruach v'nefesh. In other words, the two, we know that we have three main levels in the soul: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. So how do ruach and nefesh connect together? Well, that's how they connect. They connect in the cholol hasmoli, and from the cholol hasmoli in Nimshach, what it got from the brain, the ruach into nefesh. So that's called a union. So he said in the Zohar Kodesh, that's a union, is chabros, to joining together ruach v'nefesh, the char nukva, male and female, masculine and female, kamishkosa b'zoya b'saba demishpotim, as written in the Zohar in what's called the Saba of Pasha Mishpotim. That was last week's Pasha, not this week's Pasha, but last week's Pasha. And there's a famous section right from the beginning of Pasha Mishpotim up to a certain stuff in the Zohar Kodesh, which is called Saba de Mishpatim. It was said by a certain Zokin, and it's called, it's all messages from him. But again, there's certain inyanim, and that's called the Saba de Mishpatim. It's very, very high, and especially in Yonim, and therefore it's called a name, Saba Mishpat. So over there, in that area, the Zohar Kodesh, it says that the union of the Char Nukva, of Zohar and Nekeva, well, that's the union of the Ruach with the Nefesh. In other words, the Nefesh is like the Nekeva, the Ruach is like the Zohar, and they get together through the passage of the Ruach, which is Chayim, into the nefesh through the medium of the chol hasmol of the lay. Umishom, and from there, nimshach hadam b'chol ha'evorim. Once you get into the chol hasmol, then it goes into all limbs. Shehu ha'ika ha'chayis ha'machayis ha'evorim. Well, that's what causes the evorim to have their chayis from the heart. Kiyadua and kamuvan. So it all began in the moyach, and its ultimate aim was to get to all the ivorim. How does it do that? It goes through the lave. And in the lave gufa, so it goes from one ventricle into the other. So we see that the lave is like the main joining up point of the lower to the higher, and it's therefore called a mamutza. A mamutza, he writes, "Mamutza hu ha'leiv," and the middleman is the lave. Or below he said, it's not shayach sheyumshach hachayis min hamoyach levorim. Because it's too high, too in a rock, one to the other. The moyach is very, very high and detached, and the evorim are very almost chumnias. They're almost like material in their way of living. But from the moyach to the evorim, it's too distant. Then we have to have a middle point. Now that middle point is the lave. And the lave receives the ruach chaim and passes it over into the makabel, which is the evorim. So now, on the basis of that whole moshel, we're going to build up a nimshal. We're going to just finish the moshel. V'lochein, in the basis of all we just said, k'shiyikre, that's a misprint. It should be, instead of an aleph, it should be a hay. Because k'shiyikre, when it will happen, chas v'sholem, Eza kilko bi'aleiv, and therefore if there'll be some malady in the heart, kilko meaning like a ruination or a spoilment, There'll be some upset in the heart. Retain lema or Rahman in Atlan maybe. Hashem should guard us. Ein achayis mishpashet kol kach be'evorim. And therefore, once something's wrong with the heart, then the chayas can't really reach the evorim. It's not able to be mishpashet only minimally in the evorim. V'chol gufei nechlas alidei kilkul leiv. And therefore his whole body becomes weakened through the upset or the melody in the heart, like we see b'pashtas. Shehu ika hamamutza shemekabel min hamoyach umashpil le'evorim. That's a mamutza. Mamutza takes on a higher level and gives out further to a lower level. That's the function of a mamutza. So if the heart chas v'sholom is affected, all the other evorim get affected. And therefore, if a person has got, Rahman and Atlan heart melody, his whole goof is out of order, not completely, but it doesn't. It only functions in a minimal efficiency. So we see then that we got a very delicate chayas that goes from a moya, and it gradually becomes more shy to a more gashmius or almost chumius type of chayas through the medium of the heart. And the heart, therefore the Alter brings in Tanya, in Perek Tezayin, that the heart is chumri kesha evorim. The heart has a mila that it's like materialistic like all the other evorim. However, it's also got a mila that's a little bit not that way as well. It's also able to live in a ruchnistic and receive ruchnistic messages from the moya. But its mila is that it's like the other evorim in the sense that it's shot to material and to gashmias. Mashing the moyach not. The moyach just can't possibly achieve that. Therefore, we need the emtoyas of the lay. So that's the marshal. Now we're going to build in Ruchnias. What is the imshal? What is the thing we're comparing it to? In a similar way, Yuvan Bavida Benefesh Adam. We'll understand in the Ruchnias purely Aveda of the Nefesh of the Adam meaning to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Nefesh Aveda Benefesh Adam means his service to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Dehine Ramach Pikudim, that's one on brought down in Tanya, also in Perek Dalet. It's very interesting. It's interesting how we see the different bullseyes. Once again, Ramach Pikudim, Aim Ramach Evorin Damalke. It's one on that the 248 mitzvahs are say Pikudin, the Arabic word for mitzvah. Mitzvah is orders, literally. The 248 mitzvahs are say they are Ramach Evorim Damalke. They are Kaviyochu, the 248 limbs of the king, meaning the Eivishter. The Kaviyochu, they're the limbs of the Eivishter. V'shasor loisasei, and the 365 negative commandments, aim shasor gidim, that the mention's got, apart from 248 limbs, according to the Mishnah in Oiles, he's also got shasor gidim. Now gidim mean like blood cells and sinews, where all the blood throws through and all that sort of thing, joins different things together. They're called gidim. So they're connected with the mitzvahs leisaseh. So altogether you got tariag, like limbs and gidim in the makeup of the body of the mensch. So here, notice carefully how the nimshal works. That the mitzvahs, they're the Eibishter's evorim. They are, why are they called the Eibishter's evorim? Because the purpose of the function of an Eiver is that it eventually receives the chayas and it draws, as it were, chayas, or it calls on the chayas from the nefesh. So in the same way, the mitzvahs, they have elikus in them. They're like the Eibush sending forth chayas, Kaviyochel, from himself into the world through the mitzvahs. So that when we do a mitzvah, we create energy. We let forth energy, which is the chayas that we let forth into the world. So the mitzvahs are like the evorim. They're called the Eibush's evorim. And the moyach, here is the Av of a Yira, which we're supposed to do, the mitzvahs. In other words, that, well, in Emerson, the Moyach would be higher than that. The Moyach would be Kavioch in Elakus, Lamaila, and the way we mashpia into the world is that we're Makayim, the Evorim, which are the mitzvahs, through Av of a Yira. What Av of a Yira is not the Moyach, Av of a Yira is the Leiv. In other words, that our Leiv in the middle between the Eivishter and the mitzvahs is our Leiv of Av of a Yira. So it's a little bit delicate, so it's slightly different, but it's the same principle. That we have the mitzvahs coming from Hashem. The ultimate mitzvahs have to be Kashmirs, but that's like the Evorim. It has to be in the physical world. In the middle is us, and we keep the mitzvahs. If we keep the mitzvahs by Av of a Yira, that's like a heart in the middle. It's like running the main chayas from Hashem through a mamutza that it can reach into Kashmir. What he means chayas, he means enthusiasm and brim, not just any old how. Enthusiasm and fire in keeping the mitzvahs. Or just like we see, it's through the heart. The mamutza is the heart. So here the mamutza is the Adam, the Yid, that he has to have Av of a Yira. What he beginners Av of a Yira. The Ava hu makir ramak mitzvahs asay. If you have love, then you do all the mitzvahs asay. But Yira makir l'shah shah mitzvahs loisasay. That's what he brings. Okay, my supposed to save yourself in Perik Dalet. That's exactly what he says in Perik Dalet. We're just a short way away from that. Another shiur will be right there. The key mitzvahs say who alidei Av udavke. If you love the Eibusher, then you want to be dovuk in him, you want to be close to him, and cleave to him. You can't be dovuk in the Eibusher when he's unlimited. Ki'im alidei mitzvah, davke through keeping the mitzvahs, but down here in the physical world, well, that binds you up with the mitzaveh. And as well known that the word mitzvah is from Lashon tzavsa. What tzavsa means, like a joining of people together, a group of people who are all joined together. Called a tzavsa or a tzevet. In the same way, the mitzvahs join us up with the Eishter, which normally, in inverted commas, is impossible. Normally, it's not shayach. But through the mitzvahs, then we join up with Hashem. And we can suggest that that's what the mitzvahs are, that they're, like we said before, the Evorim. Why are they called Evorim? Because they draw out of Hashem Hamshochas and Kilui of the Eibishter into the world. So how do we do that? Through Aviyah. We're like a lave in the middle, that the Elokus is coming down. It can't reach the world because the world is too low. But through the fact that we have Aviyah, we bring those Hamshochas from the Eivish into the world. V'yiro, Makir Shasar Mitzvahs Loisase. Sheyore Limrid Boy, Oeshem is Boishes, like we saw in Paragimel. He's ashamed. Lava El Rotzen Amelech Honor. We're always standing in front of Hashem. Everybody's in front of the Eivish. So how could you possibly do a thing that he doesn't want, and even in front of him? Okay, that's like the Moshe. The Moshe is the mitzvahs are the Ivorim, the Eibush is as it were a Moyach, which is giving forth this very delicate Oyer and Tzoy, Hamshochas. We are in the middle, and we are like the lave. If we have Aviyira, then we're a good lave. If we don't have Aviyira, then we're a sort of a faulty lave. Oh, how do we get our midas? How do we bring about our midas shebelev? How do we become like the heart in the middle that we have midas shebelev? And that comes through the union of Chokmah Bina. Shalideya is bonanas shemis boinen b'moichay. Gedulas erein tzev neilodim bechinas midas shebaseichel. Like we saw, that's the first thing that happens. First, we have this scene in his pilot sichlius that the brain appreciates in a very principled way that it's good to be davuk in this union. It's not yet a feeling in the heart, but it's a general feeling of wanting the good, of being davuk and cloven to the good. And that's called Techilu Urochimu Sikliyim. Noeladim beginners midden Shabbat Shahim Techilu Urochimu Siklim. Now Techilu Urochimu is the Aramaic for Yira ve'ava. Techilu is Yira, Urochimu is Ava. Sikliyim, they're within the brain. Vahim nimshochim alidei meitza hakorin v'nasim moichin lamide shebelei. Ad שגם בליבו יספויל בבחינת מידס אהבה ויראה במורגש. Now, here the Rebbe is hinting at a whole Seder. First of all, you have midas shebaseichel, these pilot sicklies. Then he said it's got to go down to the Mitzah Hagorin. It's got to go down through the throat pipes, get into the heart. So those throat pipes are ruchnis, of course. There's a whole passage where there's likely to be the Sari Para and others are likely to get in and interfere. Well, that's a beginning and considers without going to the dangers and the difficulties of getting through the how do you call it, the strait of the throat. But anyway, that's the ultimate aim, that you got to get from the moichin, these pilots of the moichin, which are called midas shebaseichel. You got to get what's called seichel shebamidas. Got to go down a union where the moichin have now entered the realm of the midas. That's called seichel shebamidas. That's what he said. Shalideis bonan shebamizbeinem b'moichi b'kidus neilodim b'chinas midas shebaseichel shehim dechilon achim sekim v'heim nimshochim alidei the strait of the throat v'nasim moichin lemidas. Now moichin lemidas is called seichel shebamidas. Not midas shebaseichel, no seichel shebamidas. That's called moichin lemidas. That's a much lower level, which is already prompting the midas and pushing them and bringing them out of their state of helem. Ad shagam beliboy yispoel, until finally in his heart he is affected b'chinas midas avavayira b'murgash. Then he feels avavayira mamish in the feeling of the heart. Oh, that's the final aim. So we go from midas shebaseichel through the Meitzah Koren, then seichel shebamidas, then midas. That's the way it works. And then the life force, meaning the enthusiasm and the brain and the excitement and the koch, that will go out in into the limbs. What are the limbs here in our whole nimshal? Sheim ramach mitzvah sesiv v'shasor chulu. Shasor mitzvah loisasir. Oh, that's the ideal Seder. That's how it's supposed to go. That's how it's supposed to be. Ach, kisheina nishu b'leiv, yeah, rotzein aleim she'ena mispoil b'liboy. When it's not nimshing into the heart, meaning that he's not mispoil mamish b'liboy, he's not affected emotionally in his heart, be'ava v'yira, meaning b'murgash. Mamela eina mispashet b'yivorim, therefore it doesn't go into the mitzvahs, which are the yivorim. Shem mibchinas techilu rochimu siklim, b'loi emtsoyes amidas shebeleiv. Without the middle point of mamutza, or the midas shebeleiv, loi yove, he won't come alidei zeh lekayim amitzvahs klal kediboy lemahevi. In other words, only from these midas shebaseichel. If you want to rely on that, you'll never get to kiyum mitzvahs mamish how it should be. In other words, it will be a bit sort of heichitesi, you'll feel that that's good, and you'll feel how do you call it, a certain, what's the word, a certain impression that's a worthy thing to keep the kiyum mitzvahs and to do mitzvahs, do them properly. But it's a general enthusiasm. It's not a real koch on the heart and pressing a person into it with excitement. So therefore he said, from those midas shebaseichel, you come to the keeper of the mitzvahs kedeboy lemahevi, like it's really meant to be. Kedeboy as the rotzen lamahevi to be. Now that means, like he says in Tanya, that you can't have Avavira Amiti. You can't have maybe Avavira like we saw, Demiena Shor. In today's Perek, in Tanya we learned that. You can have maybe, imagery, but you don't necessarily have, and you can't have genuine midas. Therefore he said, Va'ika heima midas shebalayv. Ika is a midas shebalayv. Even though, as I pointed out earlier, they're a low madrega, they're not such a delicate. Again, that's what he hints at in Tanya, that the midas shebatoich haseichel are very high level. They're a very elevated level, but they're not able to ultimately achieve what we really want. Like we saw in the moshel, if you don't have the lay functioning, then chas v'sholem, the rest of the ivorim also become weakened, and they become sort of not. So same thing here. If your heart's not with Ava V'yira, then your mitzvahs are sort of, hechitesi, kilo. Yeah, but moshel v'chein on a roim b'chush ba'aveda she'ika chayes. Enthusiasm and brain, but ma'isa hamitzvahs, in the keeping of the mitzvahs, papoyo, humi ais pilas avavira mugashois. Davke, when you feel it in the heart, davke, b'midas shebalahiv. Well, that's when you keep and that's what the Alter Rebbe says there in Perek Dalet, that Makayim on be'emes, he who keeps the mitzvahs in a genuine way, who are oyev Hashem Hashem, v'chofetz l'davke boy. He's got a pneumistic brand to be davke dovok in Hashem, or he keeps the mitzvah. We can see you've got to get to that, his pilus, mamish b'murgash in the heart, that's the Olam Tachlis. And if you don't have that, then you don't really have the mitzvahs the way the Alter Rebbe would prefer you to have, or assume that you should have. That's a pretty sobering thought. He said, Pulas amoichin, hameinim b'chinas amidas shebeleiv, hu demipchinas is galas amidas, yochel iyes achizas achitonium, k'mashkos mokim acher. Pulas amoichin, hameinim b'midas, hu shelo yeh yanike lechitonium. And here the Rebbe is hinting here in this Maimai, he hints at the whole great chapters of Inyanim which are brought down in other places. And that is that he says that the moichin, if you're functioning right in your avodas Hashem, then the moichin don't go down through the Meitzah Goren and the whole thing, and then produce midas shebalev, and then they just withdraw. If they do, then that's not good. Even when you've already got the midah functioning and you already feel genuine out of Hashem, it's proper and it's the correct function. The moichin should continue to be maya into the midah. They like to keep feeding and prompting the midah. Even though the etzem midah may not need to be prompted a great deal, because the midah, once it takes off with its own feeling, it's got its own shortish benefits from whence it can derive its bread. To touch it all off is difficult, but you have to go for this whole Seder. However, says the Rebbe, there's a inyan with the moichin continue shining into the midas afterwards. So what do we need that for? So he says, because from midas b'murgash in the heart, there can be a yanika lechitonium, can't there? Yeah? Got to keep your mind on what we're doing. So, what does that mean? Since these midas are b'murgash, then they can drift a little bit into inyanim. So it's important that the Baal Shem Tov said, for example, that a man can feel ava b'shas tefillah, and once he goes back into the world, and the moichin tend to depart from the midas that he had, then he can be attracted to other things as well. Because ava is a feeling of attraction and nearness to something. Instead of the ava being purely an elikus, it can drift over into something which is not per se. And he can be attracted to all sorts of things. And that can lead to what's called a taiva, Yeah, either for any Indian in the world, eating for money, for all sorts of different things. And so the koyach hachesed and ava, which was meant to be velakus, drifts aside. And therefore it's written that somebody has yira, for example, a shas atfila, and he's really, for a ton matira, then when he's finished down, he can get very easily angry. He has to be very careful. He can fly into because yira is gvura. As he can fly into a gvura, he can tell other people who he doesn't think are beseda. He'll get angry and he'll trash them and everything. And that's not, you're not supposed to do that. Particularly with people that are not really, shy to you, kokach, and you get angry at them and you shrey and carry on. That's not the right way to behave. Therefore, that can happen, mitzad, that once the moichin retreat a bit from the midah, then the midah can drift a little bit, because it's murgas, it's a feeling, it can drift to the chitonius. And therefore he can get angry, even with his own family or with people. You get angry, it's not really the way he should act. It's not really a necessary reason to have got angry. And therefore, that's a unique chitonium from the yira that there was in Davening. So, it's a pretty serious business here. He had a ultimate aim in the whole Veda, and it can drift aside. And therefore, the answer to that is that the moichin should continuously be me'ir in the midah, even though in a certain way they may not, the midas, midadetzim minyonam, they may not need that because they have their own power now, mitzad, the midas, shebe'etzim and everything. But they need always to be guarded, and as we're guided a bit by the seichel. Therefore, it's a good thing for the Purus HaMoichin, but they are me'ir b'hamidas, but that protects them, that protects the midas, that there shouldn't be an achiza l'chitonium. O Purus HaMoichin ha'me'inin b'midas hu shelo yeh nichus achitonium. So, well, it looks a good formula. Here we've got midas b'moichin, going through the Meitza Hagoren, come moichin sheba midas, and now that's produced the actual midah, and he's got Avos Hashem and all this good stuff, and he's also careful to keep the moichin. But the Rebbe said we've forgotten one very important. The whole plot thickens. We've forgotten one very important factor here, and that is that how do you get through the Meitza Hagoren, how do you get enough chayas and enough motivation and enough kesher with the heart to get through the Meitza Hagoren and to bring those midas sheba moichin down to become moichin sheba midas and produce the whole thing. How do you do that? How does that work? He said that's das. So this is function of das. And like we saw today in the Tanishya, that das is the deep sense of the person being himself involved, that it's his inyan. In Seichel, it's the inyan. In the heart, my inyan v'odeh. How do you get from my inyan to a inyan to my inyan? I should really be nogea in the thing. Well, that's das. So in other words, what we could say in a general way is that the moyach understands, yes, shezeh dovet toiv, b'li negia. How do you call it? Untouched, and what's the expression? Pure, and the person needs to feel that thing is nageya. It's important and meaningful to me. That's called nageya. How do we get from the detachment of understanding in the moyach, Eiksha Dova Hu Toiv, but Toiv Be'etiv? How do I get to lead to? It's good for me in a way that I'm forkocht and I'm touched. I'm nogea b'kolador. So he said that the Eivisha gave a special gift called das. The das is the feeling on the part of the person that he's here and he's important. So that's what I call today in the Tani Shul, and I think I'm not far from being correct. That's what we call holy self-feeling. It's feeling yourself, being aware of yourself in a way that's good. That's the way the Abisha wanted you to use your feeling of yourself. In other words, that there's a power in the brain which makes me feel that this is a message to me, and my whole life is involved in this, and it's nogea to me. It's part of my life, and that's my aim, and that's why I was brought here into the world. I should have Avos Hashem. Das bin ich. In a way that it means something to me, and it's my life. That's called Das. That's the power. Or once that starts functioning, then the message will get through, because the Das is pulling it down, and it's like a pulling, how do you call it, function, and a pulling instrument that Hashem put in there. I never to pull it down through the difficulties of the mates I caught and never get it into the heart. That is a Das. That's what he says now. Ach, meaning, however, it should be nimshach from the moyach into the heart. Yeah, all that we've said is true, but how is that going to function? So he said, Hu alidei das davke. Shubchin is das taktoin, shemakashe bechinas hamoichin bihamidas. Like we saw, there's das elyon. Well, that's a higher union. That's in the moichin, chokma bina. But here we're talking tachlis. How do we get down into the life? Well, das taktoin. Shemakashe bechinas hamoichin bihamidas. Dahainu kishemizboinen besikloi ba'eze is bonanas. Yeah, and he will be misboinen in some form of isbonanas or some form of deep reflection in Elikus. Yispoel beliboy misbonanas. He should be affected in his heart. And that is bonanas. V'loi k'moishe choishev ezadova she'einu nogea l'atzmosei. And not that he should see this as something that he's been thinking about, but it doesn't really matter to him. He should see and feel that it matters to him. And that's the meaning of Das. Das is how you feel yourself, and this means you. That's important to you, and this is your life, and you've got to have it. Das is the pulling of it down into the feeling of the self, but a holy feeling of the self. Because if you feel yourself just Tamazoi, you can run after everything with Google eyes for the whole world, because you feel yourself. You've got to feel yourself, but you've got to feel yourself in a way that Elikus is nogea to you. And that's it. That's the union of Das. That you shouldn't think about it as being something that doesn't matter to you. Ena nogea le'atzmusay. Ke'im sha'izbonanas yagia el levovei mamish. That it should come down into his heart, and it should touch and reach his heart. She evolid mizeh ha'ava v'ayira. Ultimately, they should be born out of it. Oh, so now once again we go back into the realm of Gashmias, and the Rebbe describes it now once again back in the moshel of how man functions in everyday life in the world. And that's what he says now. Kamoy der moshel midos avavira Gashmias. Yeah, the midos of avavira in the physical world. Let's take an example. Let's say he loves something in Gashmias. He really likes something and he's attracted. Yeah. Masha oyev dover hatoiv. What he loves, things which are good for him. Or mishyore, and he's afraid. Right? And he draws away me'adover hamazikle, from something which can damage him or not good for him. Yeah. So he said, Hu alidei adas tavke. That also goes through Das. Ruinin hargoshes atzmus. That's what he feels his own self. Hargoshes atzmius. He feels his own self. Shemargish nafshay. He's aware very much. At the court, he's very, very self-aware. He feels, not just aware, but he feels himself. The Loshen Ashkenaz der Herr von sich sehr stark. The feeling of the self, very strong. Der Herr means not just hearing, but really hearing deep in a pneumius of your own self. said that's what das is in simple life. Das is what binds you over to the, oh yeah, that's a good thing. Or that's for me, I have to have it. And how do you say that? Because you think that you're important. You're magish your own self very much. So whatever's good has to be for you. And he said, mitzad avas atzmai, and mitzad the love of himself, rotzein leima avas hanefesh. Ariyu chofetz ma'id is pashas achayas hanefesh. She is pashat pagov. So now the Rebbe is connecting. He's sort of making it a little bit edel out, the whole thing. He feels himself. Who knows what that could lead us to think? What it means he feels himself. So therefore, the Rebbe, what it means is not just he loves himself, but he loves his nefesh, and he knows that the nefesh is his life, and therefore he's devoted to what is good for his nefesh, and he feels that very, very deeply. And therefore, what does a man want? He wants his nefesh to be mispashed in the guf, and he would hate anything that might stop, anything like illness or malady or weakness or things like that they stop his pashtus on nefesh. So he hates that, as it were, and he abhors that, he pushes it away. Over the spreading of the nefesh in the body, that he's very devoted to. So he said that's what we mean by loving of the self, or the feeling of the self. Not just feeling the body and wanting things in a chumanistic sense, but wanting that the neshama and the nefesh, they should be ever present in your body in a way which is good for you, meaning good chayes. That's what he said. That's what it means being bound up with yourself in Gashmi. Amamira, he said, Kumta is that you want that everything should be good for yourself, and therefore you want that the nefesh should be mispashi and give forth life undisturbedly inside your body, not because you want the body, but because you want life. You love the idea of the spashtus achayis. You love life. Therefore you want what's good for your life. That's it. And now he goes on to say, just like we saw in that whole moshe over here, in the same way we're going to go back now into the nimshal. And so the same way, you have to be devoted with that whole feeling that there should be nimshach elakus through your act of Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs, into your life and into the world around you. You should want that in the same way as you want, and you can, and you because that's the koach hadas that was put in your brain. But that koach hadas as an ability, just like you feel yourself, and you feel elakus should be part of the world and part of you, also because you feel yourself. But it's a holy feeling of the self. It's a good feeling of the self. So I think that's where we'll hold this evening and go away. Tomorrow we'll try to go ahead a bit. The whole Inyan. This is a very, very profound Inyan. It's not at all simple. And you've got to be very careful to differentiate one Inyan from the other. Midrash of a Seichel and Moichin to, but Midrash now we've got Das. It's all very, very amazing in knowing. And this whole Inyan, Hagosh Atzmei, should be carefully defined. And like I mentioned today in the Tanishir, we also need to sort of carefully work out what goes first and what comes after. Does these kashas come after this feeling of wanting what's good for your nefesh, or does these kashas lead to that? And so it appears differently. It's like different. Here it's going to appear that Rebbe says it one way. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But it's a very tricky Inyan. Not so simple. It's all Inyan does. But it's the key to the whole secret of this. That's what the Rav Rashab told this professor. That to bind the moed to the hat. That's the whole job. So we've got to bring Mashiach nowadays. We've got to function on all levels. Good. All right, so we'll talk about that more tomorrow. I already turned off. So it went blank.
Yeah, it's
It's finished.